I still remember the day my life fell apart. Not because someone screamed or attacked me, but because of silence. Yes, silence. It was the weapon that destroyed everything I loved, and later became my greatest strength. My name is Elara. I wasn't born rich, but I grew up feeling like the world was mine. My father made sure of it. He wasn't just wealthy, he was kind. The kind of man who would kneel down to help a servant rather than command. He called me Little Star and used to say, even the darkest nights fade when a star knows how to shine. And for a long time, I believed him. I believed he'd always be there. But life doesn't care about promises. He fell ill, slowly, painfully. And in the middle of one quiet night, he was gone. I still hear the silence in that room. No screaming, no last words, just the stillness of a world I'd taken for granted. And standing beside his coffin was the person who would become my undoing. Lady Varia, my stepmother. She held me close at the funeral. "Don't worry, Elara. I will take care of you." She said the words like honey, but her eyes told another story. Things changed faster than I thought. I lost my room first, moved from a bright upstairs room to a dusty little box near the kitchen. I lost my clothes next, replaced with worn hand-me-downs. People stopped calling me Miss Elara and just said, Elara, like I was a burden. I became the one who washed dishes, cleaned walls, laughed at jokes made at my expense. Her daughters, Livia and Mara, loved watching me fall. They would walk past wearing silk, whispering to each other, "Look at her, not even a real daughter." They laughed. I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I decided to hide my pain behind silence. It kept me invisible while I listened. One night, everything changed. I was carrying tea into the study, a room I used to love, and I heard voices I wasn't meant to hear. My stepmother laughed softly as she said, "She still thinks this house belongs to her. The papers are gone. Her father's will, rewritten. Everything belongs to us now." Livia giggled, "She's so blind she doesn't even know she's living in a house that isn't hers anymore." I stood there with tea spilling onto my hand. And finally, I understood. I wasn't forgotten. I was stolen from. But I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I simply took one breath and whispered inside myself, "You won't see me fight until you don't see me coming." I remembered something suddenly, my father's voice. "If you're ever lost, go back to where I first held you." It haunted me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I searched the cellar. And under dusty trunks and old boxes, I found a metal lockbox. I pried it open. Inside was my life. The real will. A document naming me the sole heir. Every account, every property, every inch of the estate. Legal, untouched, protected. They had forged their power, and I had just found mine. I hid it again and waited. Silence became my strategy. Days passed. I said nothing. Worked, smiled, swept. Then one night, I walked out the back door. No suitcase, no goodbye. Just determination. I walked through rain-soaked streets until I reached the one person my father trusted, Mr. Arden, an old lawyer in a hidden part of town. He opened the door and said only one word, Elara. I placed the will on his desk. He studied it, looked at me. He said, "You didn't lose anything. You were robbed. What do you want to do?" I stared him dead in the eye and said, "I don't want noise. I want silence with consequences." And so we built a plan. For months, I used fake names. I became the unknown investor who bought their debts, their properties, their banks. Every time they needed income, I shook the strings from the shadows. A slow, precise tightening of a noose around their financial neck. 6 months later, their accountant reported, "There's a creditor claiming ownership of the estate." Varya laughed until the next letter arrived. "Vacate within 30 days. She panicked. All her loans had been denied, their accounts frozen. She never suspected who held her leash. Then one day, a black car pulled up outside the mansion. I stepped out. Not the girl they once erased, but the woman they never saw coming. I walked past the staff, who froze, and into the study. Varya stood waiting. "You must be angry," she said, desperately smiling. "I disappeared, and you kept this house. You should be grateful." I placed a folder on the table. The real will. Her face drained of color. She flipped it open. I waited. "This house," I said, "was always mine." Livia rushed in. "You can't." I cut her off. "Watch me." I wasn't screaming. I was owning. They tried to steal everything, and silently, I'd taken it all back. But revenge is not about power alone. It is about choice. So I made one. I didn't throw them out. I made them stay. I looked at Varya, Livia, and Mara and said, "You will work for me. You will clean, cook, scrub floors, until you know what it means to steal someone's life and bury it beneath dust and silence." And they did. But something unexpected happened in the quiet that followed. They began to break. Mara apologized quietly when she made mistakes. Livia stopped mocking the staff. Varya stopped pretending to be above everyone else. One night, Mara stood in the hallway and whispered to me, "I'm sorry for everything. You were never weak. You were just silent, and I mistook that for nothing." I saw something in her eyes I never expected. Fear, shame, and something like change. That night, I whispered to myself, maybe revenge is complete when they become the people they used to hurt. Maybe. But as I watched them work humbly, silently, I also saw that I wasn't done. Because revenge was not just reclaiming power, it was reclaiming myself. Days blended together as silence replaced chaos. I watched from afar, remembering how once I had stood outside the kitchen door, small, invisible, while they laughed at me with wine in their hands. But now, they walked past with bowed heads, careful steps, and whispered apologies to the house they once claimed. Sometimes I heard the staff murmuring to one another, "Miss Elara is different now." "No, she's always been this way. We just didn't see her." But I didn't correct them, because they were right. The girl they ignored had always been here, quiet as moonlight, waiting for her dawn. One morning, I found Mara scrubbing the marble floors. She didn't see me yet. Her reflection blinked up at me in the shining tile. Her eyes were puffy, but her posture steady. She worked harder than anyone in the house. Not because I forced her, but because she was finally trying to rebuild herself. When she noticed me standing there, she stood quickly and said, "I'm sorry for everything. You were never weak. You were just silent, and I mistook that for nothing. I saw something in her eyes I never expected. Fear, shame, and something like change. "You're learning," and I walked on. Soon after, I found Varya in the hallway. This time, she wasn't hiding behind pride. She wasn't decorated with fake jewelry or expensive perfume. She was sweeping. Her movements were awkward, not used to manual work, but she kept going. The old version of me might have enjoyed seeing her stripped down in this way, her crown shattered, but the woman I'd become no longer needed that satisfaction. As I passed her, I saw her trembling slightly, not because of the broom, but because she was holding in everything she'd never said. Why should I speak? I let silence be her mirror. That evening, I sat with the cup of tea, the kind I used to make unnoticed in the kitchen. The smell brought back memories of a place where I once stood like a ghost in my own life. Now I held the cup like a throne. Mr. Arden visited a week later with an envelope in hand. He told me, "All of your holdings are officially secure. You own the estate, their loans, their debts. What happens next is up to you." He paused. "Do you plan to keep them here forever, as servants?" I smiled faintly. "No." He raised an eyebrow. Then I said something that surprised even myself. "I think revenge ends now. Because I had what they never expected. Peace. And peace has a way of making revenge unnecessary." So the very next day, I gathered everyone in the courtyard. Sunlight poured over old stone walls, now washed clean. They stood in one line, my stepmother and her daughters beside the staff, not towering above them anymore. I looked at them, and I spoke loudly enough for the walls to remember it forever. "You're no longer servants." Stunned silence. Not joyful, but confused. "You will not work for me anymore. You won't sweep. You won't cook for me. You won't be punished." They exchanged looks. Some staff seemed relieved. Others simply stared. But Varya, she bowed her head, slowly, like a queen offering herself to truth. "Then what happens now?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "You always thought my silence was weakness, but it was learning, watching, becoming. You tried to break me, but what you made instead, I took one step forward, was resilience. You don't owe me servitude anymore, but you owe yourselves change." That day, I set them free, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved to let go. Varya's eyes fluttered closed. Livia stared at her hands, dirty from months of work. Mara fought back tears. Some wounds heal without apology. Others heal because you stop waiting for one. That night, I stood in the garden beneath silver moonlight. The roses I once planted bloomed gently. Their fragrance brushed against my senses with something like memory. I wasn't that little girl anymore, clutching myself in the dark. I had become the woman who could stand beneath brightness without trembling. Then I heard careful steps behind me. It was Varya. She stopped a few feet away. She waited. She didn't speak first. This time, she knew. She didn't make excuses. She just swallowed and whispered, I kept something of your mother's. My heart tightened for a moment. She opened her hand and held out a small box. Inside was a tiny music pendant, a gift from my mother before she died when I was a child. The lullaby still worked when I turned the delicate key. I wasn't planning to give it back, she said with a raw honesty, but I kept it all these years. Not because I loved you, because some part of me regretted who I was becoming. I didn't know if I believed her, but I believed the moment. It was sincere, so I took the pendant and whispered, "This doesn't fix the past." "No," she said, "but maybe it keeps it from repeating." That night, I couldn't sleep because for the first time, I felt my revenge had ended and something else began. At dawn, I gave my final command, not to punish, but to rebuild. The mansion, all of it, would become a sanctuary, a place for girls like I was, girls abandoned, girls betrayed, girls told they didn't matter. The rooms that once held my pain would now shelter their recovery. I didn't sell it. I didn't destroy the house of my suffering. I transformed it into a quiet, unshakable symbol of rebirth. A home painted with peace, mirrors instead of portraits, flowers instead of false crowns. Varia stayed, not as a ruler, not as a servant, but as someone who needed to learn how to be human again. Livia became a tutor, reading stories to the younger girls in the garden. Mara wrote me letters every month from her new city. "And I see now," she wrote, "that you didn't simply rebuild your house. You rebuilt yourself and left the doors open for the rest of us." I stood one night on the balcony, the same one where my father had told me stars could guide anyone out of darkness. Below me, I saw candles glowing in the courtyard, dozens of girls carrying them, some crying, some laughing, but all holding light. And I whispered the only thing I'd been waiting to say out loud. I didn't lose. I rose. Not through violence, not through hatred, but through silence made sharp with purpose. That was my final revenge. I didn't destroy their world. I made my own, brighter, and left them to face themselves in the quiet. Because in the end, the loudest victories happen softly, in choices made without applause, in rooms filled with peace, where the person who was once broken now stands, quiet, unshakable, whole.